The introduction. The Battle of Copenhagen in 1801, also known as the First Battle of Copenhagen, to distinguish it from the Second Battle in 1807. This was a naval battle in which a British fleet fought and defeated a smaller force of Dano-Norwegian Navy anchored near Copenhagen on the 2nd of April 1801. The battle came about over British fears that the powerful Danish fleet would ally with France and create a breakdown in diplomatic communications on both sides. The Royal Navy defeated 15 Danish warships whilst losing none in return. As the British ships entered the harbour, the Danish fleet had several of its ships stationed in the city's inlet to form a blockade. The Danish fleet intended defending the capital with these ships and with the bastions on both sides of the harbour inlet. This was the second attempt by the British to prevent a Franco-Danish alliance, as the British had already entered Øresund with a fleet in August 1800 in order to persuade Denmark not to form an alliance with France. Upon hearing news of the assassination of Tsar Paul I of Russia, the Danish agreed to the British terms, as his death meant the end of the Russian-led League of Armed Neutrality in which Denmark was a member. The background. The battle was the result of multiple failures of diplomacy in the later half of the 18th century. At the beginning of 1801, during the French Revolutionary Wars, Britain's principal advantage over France was its naval superiority. The Royal Navy searched neutral ships trading with French ports, seizing their cargoes if they were deemed to be trading with France. It was in the British interest to guarantee its naval supremacy and all trade advantages that resulted from it. The Russian Tsar Paul, having been a British ally, arranged a League of Armed Neutrality comprising Denmark, Sweden, Prussia and Russia to enforce free trade with France. British viewed the League to be very much in the French interest and a serious threat. The League was hostile to the British blockade, and according to the British, its existence threatened the supply of timber and naval stores from Scandinavia. In early 1801, the British government assembled a fleet off Great Yarmouth at Yarmouth Roads, with the goal of breaking up the League. The British needed to act before the Baltic Sea thawed and released the Russian fleet from its bases at Kronstadt and Reval, now Tallinn. If the Russian fleet joined with the Swedish and Danish fleets, the combined fleets would form a formidable force of up to 123 ships of the line. The British fleet was under the command of Admiral Hyde Parker, with Vice Admiral Horatio Nelson as second in command. Frustrated by the delay, Nelson sent a letter to Captain Thomas Trowbridge, a friend and Lord Commissioner of the Admiralty. This prompted the Earl of St Vincent, First Lord of the Admiralty, to send a private note, which resulted in the fleet sailing from Yarmouth on the 12th of March. Orders were sent to Parker to go to Copenhagen and detach Denmark from the League by amicable arrangement or by actual hostilities, to be followed by an immediate and vigorous attack on the Russians at Tallinn and then Kronstadt. The British fleet reached Skagen on 19th of March, where they met a British diplomat, Nicholas Vanissard, who told them that the Danes had rejected an ultimatum. Although the Admiralty had instructed Parker to frustrate the League by force if necessary, he was a naturally cautious person and moved slowly. He wanted to blockade the Baltic despite the danger of a combination of fleets. Nelson wanted to ignore Denmark and Sweden, who were both reluctant partners in the alliance, and instead sail to the Baltic to fight the Russians. In the end, Nelson was able to persuade Sir Hyde Parker to attack the Danish fleet currently concentrated off Copenhagen. Naval support promised by the Danes at Karlskrona in Sweden, which failed to arrive, possibly because of adverse winds. The Prussians had only minimal naval forces and also would not assist. On the 30th of March, the British forces passed through the Narrows between Denmark and Sweden, sailing close to the Swedish coast to put them as far from Danish guns as possible. Fortunately for the British, the Swedish batteries remained silent. Attacking the Danish fleet would have been difficult, as Parker's delay in sailing had allowed the Danes to prepare their positions well. Most of the Danish ships were not fitted for sea, but were moored along the shore with hulks, no longer fit for service at sea, but still powerfully armed, as a line of floating batteries off the eastern coast of the island of Amager, in front of the city in the King's Channel. The northern end of the line terminated at the Trecrona forts, armed with 68 guns of large calibre, which equalled twice the broadside of a ship of the line. North of the fort, in the entrance to Copenhagen harbour, were 2 ships of the line, a large frigate and 2 brigs, all rigged for sea, and 2 more hulks. Batteries covered the water between the Danish line and the shore, and further out to sea a large shoal, the middle ground, constricted the channel. The British had no reliable charts or pilots, so Captain Thomas Hardy spent most of the night of 31st of March taking soundings in the channel up to the Danish line. Even after this survey, the British fleet was not able to locate the deepest part of the channel properly, and so kept far to seaward. The battle. Preparations. Hyde Parker allocated Nelson 12 ships of the line with the shallowest drafts and all the smaller ships in the fleet. Hyde Parker himself stayed to the northeast of the battle with the heavier ships, whose deeper draft did not allow them to safely enter the channel, screening Nelson from possible external influence and moving towards Copenhagen to engage the northern defences. Nelson transferred his command from the larger 98-gun HMS George to the shallower 74-gun HMS Elephant for this reason. On the 30th of March, Nelson and his second-in-command, Rear Admiral Thomas Graves, accompanied by Captain Domett and the commanding officer of the troops, Lieutenant Colonel William Stewart, sailed in the hired lugger Lark to reconnoitre the Danish defences at Copenhagen. They found the defences to be strong and so spent the evening discussing the plan. The fixed batteries had a significant advantage over shipborne cannon owing to their greater stability and larger guns, and the Danes could reinforce their ships during the battle. On the other hand, their ships were a mixed collection, many of them small and outgunned if engaged by many of Nelson's forces. Nelson's plan was for the British ships to approach the weaker southern end of the Danish defences in a line parallel to the Danish one. As the foremost ship drew alongside a Danish ship, it would anchor and engage that ship. The remainder of the line would pass outside the engagement until the next British ship drew alongside the next Danish ship, and so on. The frigate HMS Desiree, together with the small gun brigs, would rake the Danish line from the south, and a force of frigates commanded by Captain Edward Rieu of HMS Amazon would attack the northern end of the line. Action. With a southerly wind on the 2nd of April, Nelson picked his way through the shoals. However, HMS Agamemnon ran aground before entering the channel and took no part in the battle. Then HMS Russell and HMS Bellona ran aground on the middle ground, severely restricting their role in the battle. Loss of these three vessels required hurried changes in the line and weakened the force's northern end. The Danish batteries commenced firing at 10:05. The first half of the British fleet was engaged in about half an hour, and the battle was general by 11:30. Once the British line was in place, there was very little manoeuvring needed, and the British ships anchored by the stern about a distance of a cable from the line of the Danish ships and batteries, which was relatively long range, and the two exchanged broadsides until a ship ceased firing. The British encountered heavy resistance to some extent because they had not observed the low-lying floating batteries, and to a degree because of the courage with which the Danes fought. The northern Danish ships, which were rigged and manned, did not enter the battle, but remained on station as reserve units, even though the wind direction forced Hyde Parker's squadron to approach only slowly. At 1 o'clock, the battle was still in full swing. Provenstein's heavier fire would have destroyed HMS Isis had it not been raked by HMS Desiree, assisted by HMS Polymethes. HMS Monarch suffered badly from the combined fires of Holstein and Sala. The signal to retreat. Admiral Parker could see little of the battle owing to the gun smoke, but could see the signals on the three grounded British ships, with Bellona and Russell flying signals of distress and Agamemnon a signal of inability to proceed. Thinking that Nelson might have been fought to a standstill but might be unable to retreat without orders, the Articles of War demanded that all ranks do their utmost against the enemy in battle. At 1:30, Parker told his flag captain, "I will make the signal of recall for Nelson's sake. If he is in condition to continue the action, he will disregard it. If he is not, it will be an excuse for his retreat, and no blame can be impugned to him." Nelson ordered that the signal be acknowledged, but not repeated. He turned to his flag captain, Thomas Foley, and said, "You know, Foley, I have only one eye. I have the right to be blind sometimes," and then, holding his telescope to his blind eye, said, "I really do not see the signal." Rear Admiral Graves repeated the signal, but in a place invisible to most other ships, while keeping Nelson's close action signal at his masthead. Of those of Nelson's captains, only Riou, who could not see Nelson's flagship HMS Elephant, followed Hyde Parker's signal. Riou withdrew his force, which was engaged in attacking the Trecrona fortress, thus exposing himself to heavy fire that killed him. End of the battle. It was at this time that the battle swung decisively to the British, as their superior gunnery took effect. The guns of the dozen southernmost Danish ships had started to fall silent due to the damage that they had sustained, and the fighting moved northward. According to the British eyewitness accounts, much of the Danish line had fallen silent by 2 p.m. The cessation of firing led the way open for the British bomb vessels to approach Copenhagen. In addition, the reinforcements of the ships from the shore batteries were causing the latter to become ineffective. Nyborg tried to leave the line with Agershus in tow, but both sank. The most northerly ship, the frigate Halperin, successfully withdrew. The Danish commander, Commodore Olfert Fischer, moved from Dannenborg when it caught fire to Holstein at 11:30. When in for Stretton, immediately north of Holstein, struck its colour at about 2:30, he moved on to the Tre Cronna fortress. There he engaged 3 of Parker's ships, which had lost their manoeuvrability after being badly damaged and had drifted within range. In Fordersetten resumed firing after Captain Shortensee was ferried to it and took command of the ship. Perhaps because of raw crews, several Danish ships fired on British boats sent out to them after their commanding officers had signalled their surrender. Nelson said that he must either send on shore and stop this irregular proceeding, or send in our fireships and burn them, and went to his cabin to write a note to the Danes. He sent it with a Danish-speaking officer, Captain Sir Frederick Thesiger, under a flag of truce to the Danish-Norwegian Regent Crown Prince Frederick, who had been watching the battle from the walls of the citadel. The note read, "To the brothers of Englishmen, the Danes. Lord Nelson has directions to spare Denmark when she is no longer resisting, but if firing is continued on the part of Denmark, Lord Nelson will be obliged to set on fire the floating batteries he has taken, without having the power of saving the brave Danes who defended them. Nelson." All action ceased when Crown Prince Frederick sent his Adjutant General, Hans Lindholm, a Danish Member of Parliament, with an inquiry for the reason for Nelson's letter. The British asked Lindholm to put it in writing, which he did, in English, while making the joke, "If your guns are not better pointed than your pens, then you will make little impression on Copenhagen." In reply, Nelson wrote a note. Lord Nelson's objective in sending the flag of truce was humanity. He therefore consents that hostilities shall cease, and that the wounded Danes may be taken on shore, and Lord Nelson will take his prisoners out of the vessels and burn and carry off his prizes as shall be seen fit. Lord Nelson, with humble duty to His Royal Highness the Prince of Denmark, will consider this the greatest victory he has ever gained, if it may be the cause of a happy reconciliation and union between his own most gracious sovereign and His Majesty the King of Denmark. Nelson. This was sent back to the Crown Prince, who then referred Lindholm to Hyde Parker on HMS London. Following him there at 4 p.m, a 24-hour ceasefire was agreed. Aftermath. After the fighting had ended, the Danish flagship Dannenborg exploded at 4:30 p.m, killing 250 men. By the end of the afternoon, 3 badly damaged British ships ran aground, including HMS Elephant. The Danish-Norwegian ships had been partially manned by volunteers, many having little or no naval experience, and as they were not all listed after the battle, it is uncertain what the exact Danish-Norwegian losses were. British estimates vary between 1,135 and 2,115 captured, killed or wounded. The official report by Alfred Fisher estimates the Danish-Norwegian casualties to be between 1,600 and 1,800 captured, killed or wounded. According to the official returns recorded by each British ship, and repeated in dispatches from Nelson and forwarded by Hyde Parker to the Admiralty, British casualties were 963 killed and wounded. Of the Danish ships engaged in the battle, 2 had been sunk, 1 had exploded, and 12 had been captured. The British could not spare men for manning prizes, as they assumed that further battles were to come. They burned 11 of the captured ships, and only one, Holstein, was sailed to England with the wounded under Surgeon William Ferguson. Holstein was then taken into service with the Royal Navy and renamed HMS Holstein, later HMS Nassau. Subsequent events. The next day, Nelson landed in Copenhagen to open negotiations. Colonel Stewart reported that the population showed an admixture of admiration, curiosity and displeasure. In a 2-hour meeting with the Crown Prince, who spoke English, Nelson was able to secure an indefinite armistice. He then tried to convince first Fisher, whom he had known in the West Indies, and then the Prince of British protection against the Russians. Negotiations continued by letter, and on the 8th of April, Nelson returned in person with a formal agreement. The one sticking point out of the 7 articles was a 16-week armistice to allow action against the Russians. At this point, Stewart claims that one of the Danes turned to another and said in French that disagreement might lead to a renewal of hostilities. "Renewal of hostilities?" responded Nelson, and turning to his interpreter said, "Tell him that we are ready in a moment, ready to bombard this very night." Hurried apologies followed. The British fleet now occupied positions that would allow the bombardment of Copenhagen, and agreement was reached and signed the next day. The armistice was reduced to 14 weeks, but during it armed neutrality would be suspended, and the British were to have free access to Copenhagen. Danish prisoners were also paroled. In the final hours of negotiations, the Danes found out, but not the British, that Tsar Paul had been assassinated. This resulted in the dissolution of the League of Armed Neutrality and allowed the Danes to accept British terms. The final peace agreement was then signed on the 23rd of October 1801. On the 12th of April, Parker sailed to Karlskrona, and on the British approach, the Swedish fleet returned to the port, where Parker attempted to persuade them to leave the League. Parker refused to sail into the eastern Baltic and instead returned to Copenhagen, where he found that the news of his lack of vigour had reached London. On the 5th of May, he was recalled and ordered to hand his command over to Nelson. Nelson sailed eastward again, and leaving 6 ships of the line at Karlskrona, he arrived at Reval on the 14th of May, to find that the ice had melted and the Russian fleet had departed for Kronstadt. He also found out that negotiations for ending the armed neutrality had started, and so withdrew on the 17th of May. As a result of the battle, Lord Nelson was created Viscount Nelson of the Nile. This was not to be the end of the Danish-Norwegian conflict with the British. In 1807, similar circumstances led to another British attack in the Second Battle of Copenhagen.